Hey everybody, I'm Sam, and welcome to Illuminated Productions' list of top horror films from the 2010s. Here's a juicy list that I can't wait to get into. Before we begin, remember to subscribe below and hit that bell button to stay updated. Let's jump right in. I have a lot of really great picks to cover here. The Woman in Black. A lesser-known period film starring a freshly free Daniel Radcliffe of Harry Potter in a more mature role, one played subtly and admirably. This haunted house movie has a charming story and a remarkably gothic aesthetic in this highly profitable PG-13 rated gem. After a woman dies in childbirth, a widowed taxman is sent away from his son to do paperwork in an old mansion that proves to be possessed by the title character, as several jump scares ensue. Set in an unwelcoming marsh village, this richly produced Edwardian-era ghost tale does a good job at spooking us and keeping us invested in the pursuits of Arthur, played by Radcliffe. I can't say enough positive things about the imagery of this movie, not to mention a really fine twist that you don't see coming. Certainly not without its faults. There are some repetitive shots, though I hardly mind, as I reveled in the initial viewing and on repeat viewings. This sleeper hit won my heart for its character depth and attention to period detail, as well as consistently providing a looming tone by director James Watkins, who adapted it from the 1983 novel by Susan Hill. Love those novel adaptations. Not to mention the obviously outstanding production and art design. I mean, even just talking about this movie makes me want to go watch it right now. It. Though I admit I did not read the epic novel by Stephen King, I did find this Andy Muschietti Mama adaptation very successful in its ability to scare, entertain, and explore its diverse tones, though some criticize this, as I too can pick apart one painful Rock War green screen shot. It was one of my most anticipated films of all time for me. I could not wait to see this movie. It was a film that actually met my very high expectations, though the sequel, I must say, did disappoint. This 1980s-based coming-of-age horror film follows the Losers Club, a gang of local outcasts in Derry, Maine, who are haunted by the terrifying Pennywise the Dancing Clown, played wonderfully by Bill Skarsgård. Led with an admirably aimed cast and plenty of all-out scares, I saw this movie opening night front row in a packed theater. Popcorn literally flew in the air during the scene where the losers are at Bill's garage, played with great conviction by Jaden Martell. Another notable performance from Finn Wolfhard, who plays the group jokester. His character is played greatly by Bill Hader in the sequel, in one of the only redeeming qualities. I was a total sucker for the use of 6 different ways by the Cure as they cleaned up the bloody bathroom. Pennywise is a classic villain that you have to admit scares you in some way based on its malleability and shapeshifting. Spooky stuff that you certainly find in other King tropes. From what I gather, the film took some diversions from the book, despite it being the highest grossing R-rated horror film of all time, surpassing The Exorcist, which is on our 70s list. I, of course, adore the nostalgic coming-of-age quality that you find in King adaptations like this, but as a clown? Come on, and I know you can recall the effect of Tim Curry's Pennywise from the problematic original miniseries. I really wanted the sequel to be as good as the first, but it would never happen, especially with some terrible de-aging effects. This is not a flawless movie. You'll certainly find some cheese and some questionable execution. I was a really big fan of this experience in cinema, although I must say upon further viewings it did lose some quality for me.
It's not loaded.
Get Out. A curious, realistically haunting horror film from acclaimed director Jordan Peele, comes Get Out, about a biracial couple who go on a trip to meet the all-white family of the girlfriend. We get some great performances all around, notably Catherine Keener as the mother with some fine nuances by the father as well, played by Bradley Whitford. You might remember him as the antagonist from fan favorites like Billy Madison and Cabin in the Woods. This is a fairly well-rounded horror tale that involves mischievous white supremacists doing some pretty remarkably evil work. Terrifying indeed, and sadly so ingrained in our nation's history. Generally critically adored, the Oscars undoubtedly denied Get Out the fair chance it deserved. Some on the panel even refused to watch it. Yikes. Regardless, this breakout movie gained 4 nominations, earning a massive box office turnover from $4.5 million to $255 million. Hey, without giving too much away, I surely recommend this horror film, as the scares walk a tightrope that feels similar to a long episode of The Twilight Zone. Ironically, Peele went on to direct the remake of The Twilight Zone, though I don't hear exceptional things, as the original Twilight Zone is so good as is. Peele later went on to make Us, which I found full of laughable plot holes and in an extremely clumsy execution. Though I know many loved the film, I certainly recommend Get Out over Us. Mother. Buckle up for this turbulent allegorical tale by Darren Aronofsky, Black Swan: Requiem for a Dream. and starring Jennifer Lawrence in the titular role alongside her husband, played by Javier Bardem. The plot starts off with a couple as they renovate a house for their future family. When we get some odd guests, things start to get weird as we enter an odd kind of home invasion movie, so to speak. But Mother is so much more than that, really. We are thrown into more and more bombastic sequences as the runtime unravels, adding up to some really shocking horror that hits around the third act. You gotta work with this movie's larger-than-life premise as the house and its inhabitants becomes what can only be described as symbolism, as there are many biblical mentions throughout as well. As we endure all-out havoc, we get some truly unsettling scenes. I can recall one horror-striking scene involving the mother's newborn, in which some of the audience members actually walked out of the theater during. I was there at multiple wins as I was tempted myself. This is a challenging experience that took some time for me to emotionally unpack afterwards. Be prepared for that. This is another Aronofsky modern classic in line with his long-lasting after effects. The thing about Mother is my will to watch it again is somewhat low based on how trauma-inducing some of those scenes near the end are. It's a heavy, dark trip, albeit one intelligently and artfully structured. The Witch. A movie I find not all love. I adore A24's The Witch in all of its primordial menace. Cast on their own, an ex-Puritan family takes refuge in a forest on a patch of land where they start a new life separated from the villagers. Relevancy in 2020 by the dozen. This film got directly under my skin when I first saw it and did a splendid job at holding down my interest throughout the film's sequence of events. Anya Taylor-Joy notably stars and does a fantastic job. Already I sound like I'm just blindly praising this film, but I really did find the direction of Robert Eggers, who recently made The Lighthouse, another great relevant work, right on point, as I highly recommend this New England folktale. Other similar pictures like Gretel and Hansel, also not without its charms though. Seriously, those twins in here are terrifying, especially for being so innocent and young. The Witch rides the line of disturbing and enthralling deliciously well, in my opinion. An undeniable visual treat of devilish proportions. Here is a low-budget hit with a great box office turnover from $4 million to $40 million. With a beautifully haunting and low-key score, I love being afraid of the titular character and the twins. It may not be an all-out horror film, but its drama is palpable and vivid. For that, and a compelling eerie tone, The Witch deserves its spot here. I have to admire this kind of horror that takes a lot of its roots right from home, right within your own direct family. That's scary stuff, combined with the element of a looming witch lurking right outside your house, like an actual witch. And probably in your head that doesn't look very scary, but they really bring it back home here. Don't Breathe. I actually got to this one late at a drive-in, and despite those hang-ups, still proved to be an utterly terrifying experience, as the premise takes on an early approach to similar films like A Quiet Place. Set in Detroit, we follow some thieves, featuring Dylan Minnette from 13 Reasons Why, who are planning to rob a blind man but end up getting caught in a most horrific game of cat and mouse with some pretty nasty twists involved. I love the setting of this film, as I am from and reside now near Detroit, though most of the film was actually shot in Hungary. The broken down homes and buildings are gorgeous to look at, and we quickly enter a panic-inducing saga of relentless defenses from the blind man, played with power by Stephen Lang, known notoriously as the primary villain in James Cameron's Avatar. Praised for its simplistic and new approach to the home invasion film, this indie was a massive box office hit, with a $9 million budget earning $157 million. Nothing like a great indie horror flick to put somebody on the map, i.e. director Freddy Alvarez, who previously made the somewhat notable Evil Dead remake, which I actually kind of liked due to the addition of someone enduring a heroin withdrawal, Jane Levy, who also stars here amidst a horrific set of circumstances. Freddy also added to the soundtrack here and there on both flicks, which I can always appreciate. This movie is a true nail-biter that does a good job at being shocking at avoiding common brutal violence that is often referred to as torture porn. It won the Saturn Award that year for Best Horror Film and gained universal acclaim. There's actually a sequel in the works that just got confirmed on October 8th, revealed by Stephen Lang. The film cost around half of Evil Dead's budget, and the director enjoyed being a little bit more flexible, free of studio interference. I have to admit, the beginning of this film, in retrospect, I'm kind of glad that I came in a little late. It's a little bit of a slow start, but once we get going, the horror that takes place in the dark, especially in the basement during a black and white sequence, is very fear-inducing, with some of the greatest use of modern suspense that I've ever experienced. I certainly feel like there are some limitations to the movie here, probably based on budget and shooting schedule. Regardless, at its core is a great horror film featuring a most frightening villain.
How many?
we need to talk about Kevin. A primal fear that your own spawn may just be born evil after all, this gripping and startling picture is one of raw drama that doesn't let up during its entire duration. With a stifling tone that makes the mother character, played with pure dedication by Tilda Swinton, feel trapped with her twisted child, we are sent into some rather dark and demanding territory. Older Kevin is played monstrously by Ezra Miller, who we become genuinely afraid of, even in the shoes of what may have been a loving mother. We need to talk about Kevin gets into your brain and challenges us to see how one event can be seen in different ways depending on the witness. Without a doubt, circling the dark psychological drama subgenre, I find the premise and execution on par with what makes a realistic, effective shocker. Roger Ebert called the film a, quote, masterpiece, giving it 4 stars. I certainly admire its ability to horrify us early on and to keep delivering shocking hallucinations and emotional punches to the gut. Not to mention a really nice, ironic soundtrack that urges us to lean into some of the dark comedy aspects of this dense thriller. And of course, you have to give a shout out to John C. Reilly, who plays the father in a tremendous performance. This picture was based on a novel directed by Lynn Ramsey, who notably made Ratcatcher and You Were Never Really Here, starring Joaquin Phoenix. Smitten with award nominations, this dark gem didn't really receive its box office turnout that it was expecting. Distributed by Oscilloscope Laboratories, who made some other underrated masterpieces like Gabriel and Wendy and Lucy. To anyone who says this isn't a real horror film, I say a pox on thee. There are some really uncomfortable scenes involving manipulation, hyper-violence, and a persistent unsettling nature with Tilda Swinton that makes this film a true modern classic. Midsommar. A wonderful, dreadful, stomach-turning movie rooted in the shoes of the original Wicker Man, with the most successful portrayal of a psychedelic trip I have yet to see on cinema. Though this film is somewhat criticized for its problematic portrayal of someone suffering with a mental disorder in the beginning, the protagonist's sister decides to kill not only herself but her father and mother too. Come on! Anyone who knows depression knows that the violent behavior is usually limited to self-infliction, not others, especially your family. I mean, I realize that it drives the character's evolution from meek to bold, but they could have handled it a little differently, I think, without passing bias down to mental health affiliates. Okay, rant over, on with the film. We follow Danny in a toxic relationship with Christian, a manipulative, cowardly type who takes Danny on a trip to Sweden with him and his classmates after she haphazardly finds out about it. As we enter the beautiful and terrifying land of a pagan cult, the events to come are brutal, unforgiving, and made with a pace that I find may test some impatient audiences, though I enjoyed the breathable room of the movie. In fact, I liked the director's cut even more, which I was lucky enough to see in theaters. It demonizes Christian's character a bit more, which I found actually more effective in this kind of story. Filled with Celtic-like imagery, nudity, and trauma-inducing rituals, Midsommar is not necessarily a straight horror film, but a dark drama with horrifying scenes that lead to an ending that is certain to burn in your brain long after viewing. The film features a jaw-dropping performance by Florence Pugh and a terrific directorial follow-up from Hereditary by Ari Aster.
Välkommen hem! Otroligt grattis!
Vi älskar dig!
Enemy. Enemy is one of the only films I saw in theaters that I wanted to immediately re-watch. I was lucky enough to see this A24 gem in theaters during my time in LA at an indie film house, and though Enemy is more of a psychological thriller with dreadful suspense, scariest drama, and even flares of comedy, at its nature, I think it wants to scare us. Director Denis Villeneuve and Jake Gyllenhaal collaborate yet again, coming off an incredible joint debut with Prisoners in this loose adaptation of the novel The Double. This movie has a lot of layers going on, to say the least. Denny and Jake wanted to make something together that worked on a few different levels. Some praise its strong start, yet criticize its slip into cliche territory. But I've studied this film a few times and have seen the video essays, read the analyses, and even if you don't understand any of its symbolism and techniques, it still works as a movie involving much tonal disturbance in the yellow, smog red lens, beautifully capturing a bleak Toronto. Based around what is a pretty simple idea initially about a history teacher discovering his doppelganger, there are plentiful of involving plot twists that unravel. I don't really want to give away much here either, as there are a lot of surprising eyebrow-raising scenes that happen almost immediately. There are clearly many questions and ambiguities woven throughout the duration. There were a lot of last-minute script changes and improvisations that were made during the production and is essentially a brainchild of Denis and Jake. What really spooked me me was the ending, fascinating in its bewilderment. I'm sure some will find this film frustrating, but it's very intelligently made and has many layers that are just hidden beneath the misleading surface. It does not downplay itself to the audience and certainly demands multiple viewings. Gyllenhaal said it's, quote, about a man who is married, his wife is pregnant, and he's having an affair. He has to figure himself out before he can commit to life as an adult. That's one way to see it, that's for sure, Jake. Denis addresses some totalitarianism at play. Quote, sometimes you have compulsions that you can't control coming from the subconscious. They are the dictator inside ourselves, end quote. This film is a wonderful, underrated, surrealist puzzle that I adore exploring and find a lot of enjoyment in its really unsettling score and overall tone. It almost becomes addictive by the end, and certainly upon unpacking, this has become one of my favorite films of all time. It has quite a lot to say and has these themes of circles and identity that are richly relevant today. I certainly encourage you to watch some video essays after watching it, as you're probably going to need some explanation for the bizarre events that happen. Featuring a notable supporting role from Isabella Rossellini, who plays Jake's mom, and Sarah Gadon, who plays the wife of the doppelganger. You have to give credit to Jake too for his acting and for taking on such an ambitious indie project. This movie is certainly critically underrated and deserves a lot more appreciation.
All right, I can get you guys a solid gig. Matinee tomorrow, doors at 1, you guys are on at 3.
You've been sleepwalking since you were 12 years old.
That's a beautiful dress.
He put you in those handcuffs way before Gerald did.
You're all right, you're all right.
Yeah, I'm really sorry about Bod.
It's nothing serious.
No, it is.
Like we're the stars of the human race. Human race.
Where did you two go?
The door's locked. For your privacy. I need you to take off your clothes down to your underwear and remove all your jewelry. There's nothing wrong with me.
Komm zurück, Mama. Ich mache alles. Jetzt kannst du uns nicht mehr auseinanderhalten.
Parasite. A concept that I have found disturbing since I first saw the general premise of someone secretly living in one's residence in a segment from The Simpsons' Treehouse of Horror. Growing up in a house in the woods, our place had mice, which were sometimes in the attic above my room, so I would hear noises and get horrified by the notion of somebody coming down from above, or below in this matter. Did I just give away a spoiler? I don't think so, but it's also the reason the picture falls in the horror category, in my opinion. I was actually working on a short script that involved a similar premise when this movie was released onto my radar, with strong allegories of societal class and immorality, and executed with cunning skill rooted in survival. This is a wildly entertaining, multicolored film that swept the Oscars, absolutely earning its slot for Best Picture by the Academy. I love this movie. If you haven't seen it, watch it as soon as you sit down and start looking for something to watch. The skillful storytelling and immaculate direction by Bong Joon-ho, who made notably Snowpiercer, The Host, and Okja, all great films that I'd recommend. I'm so glad that this film was so successful, although of course there were certain Americans appalled by the idea of a foreign film winning Best Picture by the Academy, but anyone who sees it will agree with them if they gave it a real shot. I can't say enough good things about this nearly flawless film. It certainly ranks up in my top 10 films of all time as well. Do yourself a favor and expose yourself to this madcap marvel. Well, folks, I gotta tell you, I'm pretty happy that this is over with. Some amazing films, don't get me wrong. It was just a lot of horror packed into 1 month. I can say the last 2 decades were fun because I got a chance to cover some A24 films, clearly my most favorite film company out there. And in general, the 2010s had a muscle that really contributed to the overall horror collection. The 10s was a really tough list to narrow down the right way. I surely lost count of all the films I watched and the mini nightmares that just got worse and worse. Who else is up for like a light comedy list or something? I'd love to know what lists you guys are looking for out there. Comment below as we aim to please at Illuminated Productions. If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe and click that bell notification so you don't miss out on more content. We're posting multiple videos every week. Happy Halloween, stay safe, and have fun out there.